You're creating a 3D environment consisting of various objects with different sizes and textures. And you may encounter a problem when some objects have high-quality textures, while others don't. For example, a small stone with 2K texture will look significantly better than a 10-meter piece of ground with another 2K texture. To solve this problem, texel density is used. It's a unit of measure which determines the number of pixels per distance. And texel density values often correspond to the texture resolution per meter or centimeter. For instance, 1024 per meter, which means that there will be 1024 pixels or a single 1K texture per meter of surface in the scene. And if you set texel density value in the program and apply it, this turns into this. As you can see, the texel density has equalized the resolution of checkered texture for each object, and now they have identical quality. But unfortunately, it's not always one-button solution. With texel density, workflow will be different, depending on whether the tileable or non-tileable texture is applied to the model. So we look at them separately, starting with the tileable. So let's look at an example. In our project, we have a meter by meter plane, and a tileable texture for it. We choose a texel density of 1024 per meter for our entire project, which means that there will be 1024 pixels per meter of surface. So our task to make sure that there are 1024 pixels on the plane. And the question is, how can we do this? The most obvious and correct solution would be to use 1K texture. However, this solution is not the only one. You can take up a 512 pixels texture and set it tiled to 2. That way, it's duplicated 4 times and becomes a 1K texture. Or you can take the same 512 pixels texture and increase the UV map by 2 times. That way, it will take up 4 UV squares. Or you can take a 2K texture and reduce the UV map by 2 times. All these methods are correct, and the one you should use depends on the texture resolution available to you. However, the optimal approach with tiled textures is to use texture resolution equal to texel density. That is, when texel density 1K per meter, use a 1K texture. And if your model is larger than 1 meter or smaller than half of a meter, scale the UV map. Let's look at some more examples and see what will happen if we increase or decrease the plane size by 2 times. As you can see, you can use the same methods as in the first case, and the only texture resolution will differ. However, if we increase the plane size by 20 times, it will no longer be rational to use high-resolution textures, and the only tiling will be left. Of all of these methods, with texel density of 1K per meter, these are the easiest. That is, you can take a texture equal to a texel density and scale the UV map. And of course, that's all applies to any UV maps with tiled textures, and not just planes. It was all about tileable textures. Now let's take the situation when we have unique non-tileable texture on an object. In this case, we exclude all methods related to tiling, and add one new that should only be applied with non-tileable textures, which is called UDIM, but we will discuss it a bit later. For example, let's take a human UV map with same 1K texel density. The UVs of human take more than a meter, so 1K texture won't work for us. And since we have unique texture, we can't use tiling. That leaves us with only 2 options. Use a 2K texture, or divide the UV map into several UV squares and apply a unique 1K texture to each. This is called UDIM. However, it's more often used with complex models with a large number of elements. But what if we have 20-meter model that needs a non-tiled texture? In such situation, only tiled textures are used to get an honest texel density. Of course you can use UDIM, but it's not always rational. Most often in such situations tricks are used, such as using high texel density for parts of a model that will be closer to the camera and the lower one for the rest parts. Now you know the basics of working with texel density, and I think after this you might ask, is it possible to automate this? The answer is yes, there are 2 tools that can help you with that. I will show an example using Maya, but I'm sure there are similar tools for other programs. First, you can fully automate work with texel density for models with tiled textures. To do this, you only need to set the texel density, the size of a texture that you will apply to the UV, and press the set button, and the program will automatically scale the UVs to match the texel density. Second, for non-tileable textures, if you have difficulty understanding how much space the UV map of a model takes, and accordingly what size texture to use, then the program can help you with that. Let's take the same texel density of 1K per meter and a cube that's slightly smaller than a meter, with its UVs of which we want to apply a non-tileable texture, and we want to know if it needs a 1K or 2K texture. To decide, we can ask the program what texel density the model will have if we apply a 1K texture, and press Get. The program shows that with this resolution, the texel density will be less than 1K, so we need a 2K texture. Although if the value were, for example, 950, then a 1K texture could be used. Using a texel density up to 20% less than necessary is acceptable, but no more than that. And now I would like to give you some tips for working with texel density. you should always work with correct sizes. Besides solving to work properly with texel density, it's also important for rendering, and especially for physics calculations or game engines. Before starting texturing, determine the texel density. Typically, it's only selected once before starting work, and set for entire project. You can set different texel density values for objects depending on how close they will be to the camera. For example, background elements can have a texel density of 1K per meter, while those that will be in front of the camera can have a texel density of 2K per meter. When creating or choosing tileable textures, make sure they correspond to the size in your project, and you don't need to tile them additionally after applying them. Texel density is often used in game industry. In the case of video or visualization, it's usually paid less attention to because high-resolution textures are used, making it harder to notice the difference, but its application certainly won't hurt. For CGI, the average value of texel density is 2K per meter, and for the games you can use 512 or 1K per meter as a reference point. But of course it will depend on your project, and for example be 1K per kilometer. Let's summarize. Before starting texturing, determine the texel density. For tileable textures, use a texture size equal to the texel density, and scale the UV map to match it, and this process can be automated down to the push of one button. For non-tileable textures, determine how much space the UV map takes up. This can be done with the help of a program, and then use a texture of required resolution or your DIM. Also use correct dimensions in the project, and use tricks if necessary. That's all. Thank you for watching, hit like and subscribe, and I wish you cohesive textures.